Welcome to episode 6 of the Always On podcast series recorded at Carousel Executive Briefing Center here in our headquarters in Rhode Island. I'm your host, Jason Albuquerque, Carousel CIO and CISO. On this episode, we'll look to resilience through the lens of ransomware and really talk about the importance of business resilience, rapid recovery capabilities, and really how ransomware is affecting the market today. This is the Always On podcast series where we explore the intersection between technology, security, and the business with the industry's best. All right, let's go. I'm excited to have our guest today. It's Josh Haley from Cohesity, Field Technical Director. Josh is an evangelist, consultant, expert strategic and technical resource focused on enterprise technologies. He has over 20 years in Fortune 500 information technology, where he's helped organizations embrace change, help them with maximizing and optimizing technology investments to meet business demands. Josh is a proud supporter of our troops, near and dear to my heart, served 8 years in the Marine Corps. And Veterans Day is coming up, so we appreciate that. I support wounded warriors as well. So very timely. So thank you, Josh. And welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jason.
Anytime. So, we're talking about ransomware today, right? So let's dig deep. It's affecting the market so much. So much of our customers are getting hit. We're helping them with recovery. Let's kind of talk about just ransomware and resilience in general.
Perfect. So it's a very scary time. So last year, Gartner said that every 14 seconds an organization got hit by ransomware. Unfortunately, the statistic is going the wrong way. So this year, they're saying it's every 11 seconds. So we've actually sped up pretty significantly. And if you look through, I'll say the daily headlines, you'll see that almost every day another organization has gotten hit and has gotten hit publicly. There's been a couple of really, I'll say, interesting and scary ones over the last couple of months. One of them that comes to mind, an organization was down for 5 days. So they were down for 5 days. It was rumored that they paid the ransom because they didn't have protection recovery capabilities in place to recover from it. And the rumor is they paid $10 million. So
that's amazing. That's a hefty ransom to pay out. Like I had mentioned in the intro, so many of our customers are coming to us, right? Because number one, they're getting hit by this ransomware attack, but secondly, they don't have the mechanisms in place to be truly resilient and recover quick, right? So they have to really sound the alarm and get anybody and everybody they can to come help. And I look at some of the different verticals that are really targets right now. Healthcare, obviously, that came out in the news from the FBI, right? CISA came out and said, hey, we know, there's active attacks and plans against healthcare these days. Education, government. We've seen some major cities get nailed with ransomware. So, it's definitely something that's pervasive out there, and no organization can afford to ignore it, right? We have to put the protections in place. Even, this year's Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report said, the times aren't changing. They're just getting worse when it comes to ransomware. So, we're seeing it become like somewhere around, I think they said 30% of malware attacks are now strategically ransomware attacks, right? Just 30%, and it's growing. So it's definitely scary. Why don't we talk a little bit about Cohesity, where you play in this resilient space and a little bit about, the role you play with Cohesity.
Sure, perfect. So I'll start with, a bold but broad general statement, which is every day where we see one of these organizations that's been hit by ransomware, especially the organizations that have had to pay, they thought that they had a data protection solution that would help them recover, and that solution failed them. So to tell you the story of Cohesity, I have to take you back just a little bit to our founder and why he founded us. So we were actually we were started by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mohit Aaron. Mohit was one of the lead file system architects for Google. So back when Google was, one of many, I'll say, search engines, it was this file system architecture, this software-defined strategy that really allowed them to basically ingest the internet's data so that they could make it searchable. He took that file system architecture and design, and he thought that there was a really interesting enterprise use case for it. And so he actually went to become the co-founder and CTO of Nutanix, where he's credited with developing hyperconverged infrastructure. And while hyperconverged infrastructure developed or delivered simplicity for the virtualized platform throughout the data center, he saw an opportunity that why can't we use something simple and scalable like hyperconverged to solve data challenges like backup, file services, archive, and even test dev. And so that's really why he started Cohesity, was to solve the data management use cases for 80% of the data center with a simple, scalable, software-defined solution that was resilient to help organizations protect their data and protect themselves from things like ransomware.
Yeah. And you know, just a little background on myself. I grew up in the disaster recovery space as an engineer, right? So I worked for Symantec during the Veritas Symantec acquisition. You know, Net Backup was one of the primary backup solutions. And honestly, over time, it's become so complex, right? Complex from a media perspective, complex from a management perspective. I mean, we had client organizations that literally had teams that's all they did was focus on that. 100% focused on, you know, disaster recovery and backup solutions, which for me is not scalable. So hearing that simplicity piece is huge, right? I mean, at the end of the day, when you want to be a resilient organization, you don't have time for complexity. You don't have time for an entire team to have to gather together to figure out how you're going to restore your organization, right?
Absolutely. And I'll just give you a quick anecdote, which was I do a lot of public speaking. About 2 years ago, I was presenting at an industry event, and right before I went on was a CIO panel. And the question that always gets asked is, you know, what keeps you up at night? And you know, we were expecting a number of things like ransomware or cybersecurity, but actually it was really interesting. 5 of 6 of the panel CIOs, their answer was the same, which is technology's gotten so complex that I'm afraid that I won't be able to find the resources to keep the lights up and running. And so that really drives home why organizations care about simplicity.
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? I mean, we're always talking about the talent gap, right? Whether it's in cybersecurity or IT, there truly is a talent gap. And I mean, there's studies out there to prove it. You know, some of it, I believe, we're not doing a good enough job of grooming new folks to come into the industry, or doing a good enough job with our youth, whether it's in middle school or high school, you know, trying to see their aptitude, but and really guide them toward it. But at the end of the day, it's here. So the more complex we make technology, the more resources and overhead we're going to need from a human capital perspective. So again, putting a level and focusing on a level of simplicity is huge, right? It's huge to be able to operate and be resilient. So let's talk a little bit about how Cohesity helps solve some of these problems, right? With prevention, with the detection, and ultimately, obviously, with the resilience and the recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess when you think about what we do at a really high level, we have a node-based scale-out software-defined architecture. And so what that means is we build a cluster of 4 or more nodes, and we use those nodes to do things like data protection. So imagine that we have a multi-node cluster. We're protecting an organization, say virtual machines and databases and physical servers and even NAS servers or others. As part of that process, we are using a storage architecture immutability. So that first sort of concept is we have a hardened architecture where instead of your traditional data protection solutions that have, I'll say, you know, master servers and media servers and proxies and basically a whole bunch of vulnerabilities deployed throughout your infrastructure that are running on vulnerable server operating systems, we're actually delivering this as a hardened appliance with all of those supporting services, are actually container services that are running inside the platform. The container services allow us seamless scale, whether it's a small cluster or a really, really large cluster. So we bring the data into the Cohesity platform, where we then use technologies like mutable snapshots to make sure that once the data has been written, it can't be changed. But we layer into that additional technologies, things like I'm a big fan of multi-factor authentication. So being able to use multi-factor authentication to harden the appliance, being able to make sure that we use protocol whitelisting so that we can restrict who's got access to the appliance, using discrete role-based access controls to control what you can do. Again, these are all just good security hygiene to make sure that your environment can't be compromised. We can even take it even further by adding technologies like worm compliance, or what we call data lock, because a really common attack vector right now is as hackers are actually trying to get in and directly sabotage or delete the backup infrastructure.
100%, yep.
So if we use immutability at a data lock or worm level, at that point, nobody can delete it. Right?
That I mean, it's what we're seeing right now. I mean, actively, you know, the last, I'll say, handful of ransomware attacks that we've assisted customers with, their backup infrastructure was taken out as well, whether deleted, exfiltrated, because we've actually seen exfiltration of backups, and or encrypted, right? Basically, all of their backups get encrypted. So it's definitely one of those tactics that the ransomware, let's call them affiliates or gangs, right, are using these days. It's a tactic to really make you forced to think about having to pay that ransom. And by the way, recently within the last couple of months, the federal government's starting to come out here and say, wait a minute, we may fine you. If you start paying ransom, right, we may fine you. I know the Department of the Treasury actually put something out a couple of months ago saying that this is going to be a directive that, no more negotiating with terrorists. So Now what?
Yep, no, absolutely. And so to the specific point, they basically, the Treasury has sanctioned several of these hacking groups. I would use nefarious hacking groups as sort of that's what I put on them. But they've sanctioned them, and they've come back and said doing business by proxy, so having somebody else pay the ransom, puts you in violation of federal sanctions, which so what I've heard is the penalty for that is up to $20 million.
Wow.
Up to $20 million. So,
wow.
But you made a really interesting point about exfiltration. And so, we've actually seen that a number of times, including a couple of the public, events last year. What they've done is they basically go into the environment and they siphon off private or privileged information. And then they say, if you don't pay the ransom, we will actually publish this data, which will put you in breach of compliance. And so now you're looking at things like CCPA or GDPR violations, which also have very hefty financial penalties.
Yeah, 100%. And some of these threat actors are actually, what I'm saying, dangle the carrot. They'll show you instances of your data and say, see, I really have it. I'm proving to you I have it, right? So that way there's no question of whether or not they truly have it. They're dangling the carrot and proving that they've exfiltrated that data, which is very, very dangerous. We've talked a little bit about the prevention side of the aisle, right? How about from a detection perspective? How does Cohesity help with some of that detection capability?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different places that we really do what I would consider a pretty amazing job. The first one that I would tell you is one that I really, really like, which is we actually have a partnership with Tenable.io. And a lot of organizations are running Tenable. They're using Tenable security scans or vulnerability scans. But the way that we've done it is, I think, pretty unique. So as part of our architecture, we actually have the ability in what we call our marketplace to download, install, and run apps locally on the cluster. And so the idea is if we can do something that actually brings the compute to the data instead of making another copy of the data or running this across the network, we think that there's a benefit. So in this architecture, what we call CyberScan, which is powered by Tenable.io, will actually take a backup of a virtual machine, and then using CyberScan, we'll instantiate the virtual machine inside of the Cohesity architecture. Basically, we'll boot it up in a private bubble, and then we'll security scan it. Now, we'll still publish the results back to Tenable, but we'll also publish the results inside of the Cohesity interface. So here's the scenario. Imagine you go to restore a virtual machine that we have scanned with CyberScan. We'll actually tell you what vulnerabilities you're putting back on the network. So imagine if you're in the middle of if you're in the middle of an event and you know that there's an attack that you're on the lookout for, you can actually recover the virtual machine to maybe an isolated network where you can then patch it before putting it back to production.
That's great. I mean, you're basically offering almost like a sandboxing technology, right? Before you recover. That's amazing.
How many times have you heard of organizations that have begun the recovery from ransomware only to have the systems they've recovered become reinfected?
100%. Happens all the time. Happens all the time where, they literally their server systems are down, but the last backup that they had was actually infected. And then that command and control scenario happens all over again, reaches right back out and starts the encryption process. So it's definitely something we've seen, no doubt about it.
Yep. So that's one way. Another way. So just to mention this one, because it's probably top of mind for everybody, is hopefully you've all heard of Zero Logon. You've already patched against it. But if you haven't heard, basically Microsoft released a maximum severity alert that said that any authenticated Active Directory user using the Zero Logon exploit could elevate privilege to basically enterprise administrator privilege in under 3 seconds. So the reason I mention that is we have the ability to not only protect Active Directory, but when we go to do a restore of Active Directory, we'll actually show you what has changed in Active Directory from the live Active Directory to the backup. So you can actually see all of the changes that have happened out there to very quickly look and see.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think the most powerful piece of ransomware detection that we do is something that we do through Helios. So Helios is our manager of managers. It's our global single pane of glass management interface. And so what we actually do is we take the metadata from every object that we protect. So every machine that we back up, we're actually going to take a number of different data points about that machine. And this isn't data, this is metadata. Things like, how much data do you back up from this machine every day? What kind of compression ratios, deduplication ratios? What are the change rates? Which files are added? Which files are deleted? We're looking for all of those key indicators of what ransomware might look like as it goes through and encrypts the system. And we're doing this as an active day-to-day trend so that when we see something act out of trend, we can actually call your attention to it and say, this system is out of trend. Its last good backup was here, but we think you should investigate because these files have changed.
Wow.
Again, this is machine learning. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's a level of resilience that organizations need, and I'm sure are yearning for. Right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not just BCDR that you're providing. You're providing almost that soup to nuts resilience posture, right? Because you're doing a level of prevention, you're doing a level of detection, and you're doing a level of recovery at the same time. And not to mention integrating with all of these other systems like Tenable.io to give even better context across the entire network. That's amazing. And on top of it, you know, as I started looking through the website, I mean, you cover it all. I mean, you're covering Kubernetes, so containerization, right? Hyper-V, Oracle, SQL, any file and object type scenarios, and then cloud, right? AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. So your breadth is amazing and what you're able to help protect.
Absolutely. For a young company, and I'll call Cohesity a young company, we have really sort of redefined what is possible with data protection and data management. It's very interesting because I work with a lot of really large enterprises. And so the larger the enterprise, the more, I'll say, edge use cases they have, right? Yeah. And that's the trick, especially with things like data protection against ransomware and providing resiliency, is to be able to come up with a common architecture or a common solution, even for those large enterprises that have a really huge variety of needs, SLAs, RPOs, platforms. So it's been pretty amazing, the number of ways. And really, I'll say our engineering and our product engineering, they want to be a part of the solution. They iterate so quickly because we're working to meet the needs of the enterprise customers, and we know how demanding they can be.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Actually, that's a great lead-in. Why don't we start talking about some of those customers' needs, right? Because part of what we want to talk about here is not only the technology and the security side, but the business cases, right? The use cases. So let's talk about some of those customers, whether they're enterprise, emerging enterprise. But what are some of those use cases that your customers are coming to you and saying, we really need this? And how is Cohesity solving that problem?
So I have story after story. I'm gonna take you back though, because on the ransomware piece, we skipped the recovery part. So we'll talk about that first.
Yeah.
And so, if you think about it, we covered prevent, we covered detect, but obviously there are times where ransomware or something is going to get into the environment. And so it's really important to be able to help organizations recover quickly. So one of the things that we do, again, based on that I'll say pedigree from Google, is we index everything that we store in the Cohesity architecture, which means we've got a global search that's truly global across the architecture that allows organizations to find things. So that needle in the haystack of when you're looking for those ransomware events, that global search really comes in handy. But the other thing is, because we aren't just a backup solution, we're a platform, and that platform's got a number of different capabilities. It gives us a really big advantage when it comes to recovery, and especially recovery at scale. So we talk about this concept of instant mass recovery or instant mass restore, but I'll give you the how it looks in the VMware space. Most organizations, most technologies, they can recover, say, 5 or 10 VMs instantly. But when you come to a ransomware event where maybe there were 30,000 systems impacted, 10 at a time is just not going to cut it, right?
Absolutely not.
So
not from a time frame to get your business back up and running. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So imagine that because we actually have a number of different architectures and capabilities under the covers. One of those is we have the ability to serve NAS protocols. We can actually take the snapshots of the backups and present them directly back to VMware as a VMware data store, register the VMs and boot them up long before we've actually moved them off of the Cohesity platform. Wow. So we actually did a live POC for a company that is in the financial services industry. Yep. They had a requirement to see how quickly we could recover 2,200 VMs. So not the 30,000, but 2,200, still not an insignificant amount.
Absolutely.
So the moral of the story in the POC environment is we recovered 2,200 VMs. We had them all up and available in 47 minutes, and we had them vMotion back into production in 4 hours and 40 minutes.
Wow. I mean, what does that do for organizations, RPO and RTO, right? I mean, that's just amazing. Yeah.
But this is built on the strength of the platform approach that we have. And so, that's one of the things. Backup is good, but recovery is critical.
Sure.
So I'll tell you a couple of fun factoids. I have a new customer. We were talking to them yesterday. They're a great bunch of people. They were so excited. They in their first couple of weeks, they've already moved thousands of VMs into Cohesity. They actually said that their incremental for 1,300 VMs is around four hours. And they're just thrilled. I mean, they're blowing away their SLAs better than they ever have before. One of the other ones was interesting. I worked with a large enterprise that I'll say is in the defense contracting space, and so they don't have the capability of running our software as a service Helios because it's external. So we worked with them to actually write Helios as a marketplace app that they can deploy internal to their network to meet their specific requirements.
Wow. So any of you customers out there that are CMMC, getting ready for that, prepping for CMMC, all right, Cohesity is somebody you need to talk to, right? Because that's going to be part of the game.
Absolutely. One of the other ones that was really fun, so we were working with a healthcare. So healthcare, a lot of times, EMR, EHR is the absolute critical application. One of those absolutely critical applications is Epic. And so we actually worked with a healthcare system. And so we have this really interesting architecture that we call Megafile, which is a pretty cool name. You got to admit, Megafile.
Absolutely.
But the idea is we'll take files that are above a certain size, and that I say file, it could be a database, it could be a virtual machine. But once it's over a certain size, Megafile is going to break it up and stream it to all of the nodes simultaneously. And so this allows us to take really, really large data sets and break them up across our multi-node clusters so that we can protect them with inside the window. We have this technology available for, say, VMware, but we had a customer that needed it to be available for Epic. We recently delivered that to them, and we were able to massively reduce the time it takes for them to back up their mission-critical EMR, EHR database system.
Yeah.
So again, a lot of these things are based out of customer demands. I love it when customers come to us and say, it would be great if you guys could do X, because we're going to go and we're going to go and fight for that capability.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously without, laying out any trade secrets, what's the future for Cohesity? What are some of the new innovative solutions, products, getting ready to hit the market? What's that bleeding edge Cohesity side? We're always interested to kind of get some insight into what's coming.
Yeah, so we got a couple that we recently announced, so they're probably fairly safe to share. One of them I think it's really exciting to me personally. It's called Site Continuity, and so very much in theme of the conversation that we've had today is disaster recovery and business continuance. So imagine that today organizations have backup software, and that backup is probably making a local copy for operational recovery, but it's probably also going offsite or maybe to the cloud for the longer term retention. But the offsite copy isn't always good enough for the disaster recovery needs. So they're going to use something else, maybe an SRM or other tool for the virtual machines. Maybe they're going to use something like Oracle Data Guard or SQL always on availability groups. or it depends, or for every different application, they need a different solution. But each of those platforms is taking on-prem resources, remote site resources, and remote site replication streams that are managed at different consoles and managed to different SLAs. Mm-hmm. So the idea of Cohesity Site Recovery is we're actually going to consolidate most of those things into the Cohesity platform. We're going to use our site-to-site replication, which is incremental only and efficient, but we're also going to leverage the ability to automate failover for business continuance. All right, so using that same 2200 VM recovery scenario, I can now click a button and turn that DR copy into my business continuance copy, boot them up, and start running them.
At the end of the day, totally following suit into your simplify the actions, get economies of scale, not have to have entire teams just dedicated to this, right? Truly make it simple to be resilient, to be secure, protect your organization. That's great. Yeah, I mean, the future of Cohesity seems super bright. I love it. Well, go ahead.
I would say one of the other ones is a pretty interesting one that we announced is what we're calling Helios or Cohesity Data Protect as a Service. I work with a lot of organizations that they have a varied, I'll say, data protection needs. Sometimes those needs are, we've got a lot of remote sites. We don't want to deploy a lot of infrastructure. Maybe they don't want to put any more infrastructure into their data centers. What if we could actually deliver the value of Cohesity where it was software defined and we actually extracted the data from on-prem and stored it for them? So basically, Cohesity's data protection completely delivered as a managed service, without on-prem hardware.
Yeah, I mean that's key for most CIOs, CISOs these days, where again, talent gap. We talked about it earlier, not enough people to do the job, but at the end of the day, a lot of those operational activities, the talent that they do have, they want focused on strategy, right? Instead of those operational activities that need to happen every day. So having a partner like Cohesity come in and say, hey, listen, we'll take the run, we'll take the keep the lights on, we'll take the resilience, move it to us. Now the talent that you do have that you're investing in can focus on more strategic items within your IT department, your security team, whatever the case may be. Let us do that for you. More and more CIOs, CISOs are looking to that level of a partner because, again, we want to maximize our investment in the human capital. And the more run/keep the lights on we can push to a partner that we can trust, because, again, that's the big piece of it, trusted partner, we're going to do that, right? Because we want that level of efficiency and we want that level of, let's face it, internal organizations not always going to be able to compare to a power of a Cohesity too, right?
Yeah, and it's one of those things. So before joining Cohesity, I worked for a primary storage manufacturer, and before then, I was actually on the customer side. When you're in the customer side of things, you're not playing with the newest technology because it takes time to operationalize technology. So it's a really hard comparison when you're in, I'll say, on the enterprise consumer side, comparing to a technology company's pace of innovation.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So just leaving today, and again, we're getting ready to wrap up. I appreciate your time so much, but what are some golden nuggets we can kind of leave our listeners with? A call to action. What CIOs and CISOs and IT directors and security directors should be thinking about, really should be putting top of mind, because again, we know it's an epidemic out there as far as ransomware is concerned. We know that recovery isn't always top of mind or folded into the security teams as well, right? They almost operate in silos. What's a little bit of a golden nugget call to action you can leave our listeners with?
I got a laundry list, so I'll go easy on you. I'll go easy on you, but there's a couple that I'll throw out there. If your data protection partner of choice doesn't have a best practices hardening guide for you to help make sure that you're prepared for these kinds of threats, give us a call because we want to help protect you. This is an urgent issue. The biggest ones that I would strongly recommend to organizations: never use the default passwords. Use a strong password management, obviously, but more importantly than that, use multi-factor authentication wherever you can in your infrastructure. One of the real public scary cases, they actually got a keylogger on an admin's workstation. They used that keylogger to log into the data protection environment and destroy it. If they had only had multi-factor authentication, their data protection environment might have been attacked.
Yeah.
Use good hygiene for what I would consider role-based access. So, embrace the least privilege model. Not everybody needs to be a full admin all the time. All that does is further risk. If your data is critical, consider technologies like data lock, consider technologies like Worm that may cost a little bit more in the short term, but it is going to cost a lot less in the event that there's an issue. And so the last one is most technologies out there offer some kind of encryption and encryption at rest capabilities. Turn on encryption everywhere you possibly can, especially if you're using things like archiving to the cloud.
No, that's great. And thank you for that. So Josh, thank you for joining us. Thank you to Cohesity for joining us today. And for our listeners, if you want any more information about Cohesity, reach out, carouselindustries.com. If you want any more information about events like this, our podcast series, our Always On virtual series, any events that we're holding like Pizza Casts, carouselindustries.com/events. Thank you for joining us today. And thanks again, Josh, for being on the show.
Jason.